Anne, have you any last words?
I seek absolution for sins I know I did not commit.
You are a witch and a murderer, and you must be hanged by the neck until you die.
I was innocent of murder. My child was stillborn. God, please receive me.
Anne Greene had just been hanged in front of her friends and a crowd of hundreds at Oxford Castle. What happened next is one of the most extraordinary documented stories in history. Let's dive in. To understand what happened to Anne Greene, you have to understand what her life was. She was born around 1628 in the village of Steeple Barton, Oxfordshire, a small agricultural community in the English countryside. She was the daughter of working people. If you were a young woman in rural England in the 1640s and you needed to survive, you went into a service, and that's exactly what Anne did. Service meant living and working in the household of a wealthier family. Cooking, cleaning, laundering, the whole physical labor of keeping a house running. In exchange, you will receive a room, a small wage, and the social protection of being under a respectable roof. Anne went to work for the Reed family, a manor house not far from her home village. Sir Thomas Reed was a man of standing in the county with a large household. And it was there, in service at the house, that Anne's life began to unravel. Anne became pregnant with her social superior, Geoffrey Reed, the grandson of Sir Thomas. Whether the relationship was consensual, coercive, or something in between is a question the historical records doesn't answer cleanly. But what it does tell us is the consequence. For a servant woman in 1650, an illegitimate pregnancy was not simply a personal problem. The shame of it could cost her her position, reputation, and her ability to find future employment. As for Geoffrey Reed, he faced no equivalent exposure or consequence. The baby, when he came, was a stillbirth, a premature infant who did not survive. Anne concealed the birth because she was terrified and alone, but somehow, someone found out. In 1650, concealing the birth of an illegitimate child who had died was a capital crime under English law. The 1624 Act to prevent the murdering of bastard children made it a hanging offense for a mother to conceal the murder of an illegitimate infant. The law placed the burden of proof in reverse. You were guilty unless you could prove your innocence, and proving that a premature infant had been stillborn without a physician present at birth was essentially impossible. Anne was arrested, tried, and convicted. And on the morning of December 14th, 1650, she was taken to the gallows at Oxford Castle for execution. For the person that was being hanged, it was really quick. This was not the long drop guillotine execution developed in the 19th century, designed to break the neck instantly, but rather slow, agonizing minutes of strangulation. Anne climbed the ladder at Oxford Castle on a cold December morning, and by expected customary performance of penitence and submission, she addressed the crowd. She said she was innocent of murder and that the child had been stillborn. She asked God to receive her.
I was innocent of murder. My child was stillborn.
As the crowd watched, some of her friends stepped forward during those minutes and grabbed hold of her legs, pulling her downward, trying to end her suffering faster. Others struck her chest. Whether this was an act of mercy or custom isn't entirely clear. After 30 minutes, when the sheriff was satisfied she was dead, Anne was cut down. Her body was placed in a coffin, and that coffin was given to a group of physicians at Oxford, men who had obtained permission to use her corpse for anatomical study. The physicians who received Anne Greene's coffin that December afternoon were among the most prominent medical minds in England. One of them was William Petty, a man who would go on to become one of the founders of modern economics and statistics. Another was Thomas Willis, who would later produce landmark work on the anatomy of the brain. When they opened the coffin, Anne Greene drew breath. The physicians were astonished. The physicians, to their enormous credit, did not step back. They did not close the coffin nor send for the sheriff. They simply got to work. What followed in that room was one of the earliest documented resuscitation efforts in medical history. The physicians had no defibrillator, oxygen, or IV line. They had only knowledge, urgency, and improvisation. They began by forcing air into her lungs, mouth to mouth, as best they could. They applied warming agents to her hands and feet and forced a small amount of warm liquid between her lips. One account describes them tickling her throat with a feather to stimulate a swallowing reflex. Afterwards, they wrapped her in warm blankets. Slowly, over the course of hours, Anne Greene began to come back. Her breathing became more regular. Her pulse, which had been imperceptible, returned. Within 12 hours, she was able to speak, in broken fragments, but speaking. Within a day, she was conscious, and within a week, she was sitting up and eating. She made a full recovery. How does a person survive 30 minutes on the gallows? Is it the God whom I believe in, or rather some scientific explanation? You be the judge. When the legal authorities of Oxford became aware that the woman they had hanged was alive, they faced a question that had no clear precedent. Does the state have the right or the obligation to hang her again? There were voices that said yes, the law was the law, but other voices, and ultimately decisive, argued differently. In the popular and theological imagination, that was not a coincidence. That was a sign that she was innocent, that the heavens themselves had refused to let her die for a crime she had not committed. The pamphlets that circulated her story used that language explicitly. God had performed a miracle. To hang Anne Greene a second time would be to defy that miracle, to act against God. The physicians added their own weight. William Petty and his colleagues wrote formally on her behalf, asking that her life be spared. Anne Greene received a full pardon. It reflected an older maxim that if God willed a person to live, the crown had no authority to overrule it. Anne later got married and had children. By several accounts, she lived for another 15 years or more, dying around 1665. Anne kept the coffin she had been placed in after her hanging. She displayed it in her home. Visitors came to see it and to see her. She became in her own lifetime, something between a legend and a tourist attraction. If you found our stories fascinating, please like, subscribe and support us. All the links are in the description below. Thank you very much for your support.